All right, we're good to go.
Great, thank you. So we're now calling the meeting of the technical coordinating.
Oh,
should I
so
wait?
sorry. You're good, sorry.
Okay. We now call the meeting of the Technical Coordinating Committee to order. It's March 18th at 2:32 p.m. Please give your attention to this short video. Is Matt back?
Due to COVID-19, this meeting will be conducted as a Zoom meeting pursuant to the provisions of the Governor's Executive Order N-2920, which suspends certain requirements of the Brown Act. This meeting is being live-streamed on the CCTA website. The chair will call upon members, staff, and other speakers by name. Please speak clearly and state your name before giving comments or remarks. Persons participating via Zoom with their cameras enabled are reminded that their activities are visible to viewers. Members participating by Zoom wishing to speak should physically raise their hand and unmute their mic when called upon. Members should remute their mics when done speaking. Citizens participating by Zoom wishing to speak should use the Raise Hand feature or dial *9 if participating via phone, and the chair or staff will call upon them at the appropriate time. Citizens will have 3 minutes to speak. A 30-second warning will be provided. After 3 minutes, staff will lower their hand and mute their mic. Participants via phone will be called upon by the last 4 digits of their phone number. It is requested that public speakers state their names and organization, but providing such information is voluntary. Written public comments received in accordance with the COVID-19 Special Notice for Public Comment Guidelines are printed on the meeting agenda. If authors of the written correspondence would like to speak, they should raise their hand and the chair will call upon them at the appropriate time. All written correspondence received after that and during the meeting will be entered into the record. A roll call vote will be taken for all action items. Thank you for participating in a meeting of the Contra Costa Transportation Authority.
Thanks. Christina, would you please take roll call for us?
Yes. Chair Greenblatt?
I am here.
Chair Wells, or Vice Chair Wells? I thought
Here.
I'd seen. Okay, excellent. Member Alman? Member Anderson? Member Ballinger?
I'm here.
Thank you. Member Bobadilla? Member Chen?
I'm here.
Thank you. Member Conradi? Member Cunningham? Member Diaz?
Here.
Member Dillard?
Here.
Member Fahey?
Here.
Thank you. Member Kersavan?
Here.
Thank you. Member Mercurio?
Here.
Thank you. Member Nelson? Member Ortiz? I could have swore I seen her come in. I have her logged in.
Yeah, Yvette is here.
Okay. Member Parikh? Member Reeves? Member Rawani? Member Singh? Member Smith?
Here.
Thank you. Member Wang? Absent. We do have a quorum.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
The next item on the agenda is public comment. Christina, have we received any public comment?
No, I have not received any public comment.
All right, let's just check. Is there anyone wishing to speak during public comment on an item that is not part of the agenda? If so, please raise your hand and staff will call upon you. or let me know to call upon you.
I see no hands raised.
Okay. Then moving on, the next item on the agenda is the consent calendar. Are there any changes, comments from the committee on the consent calendar? And I'm going to ask staff to keep an eye out because I can't see everybody. So it doesn't seem like it. So
I don't have any.
So I'm going to assume nobody wants to pull an item. Would anyone from the public like to speak on the consent calendar? Please raise your hand.
I see no hands raised.
So due to the size of the technical coordinating committee, we will handle a motion and roll call vote after the last regular agenda item has been presented. And I'm assuming that this is going to be a unanimous motion since no one has raised an issue. Moving on to our regular agenda items. The next agenda item is an informational item on project monitoring, and Stephanie Hugh will present this item. Stephanie, take it away.
Thanks, Chair Greenblatt. I will share my screen real quick. Oh, I'm not able to. If someone can make me a co-host, I can just share the table, but if you could refer to page 29 of your packet, it shows what I'm going to discuss. But basically,
I
this
just
is
made you co-host as well. Sorry, Steph.
no problem. It's fine. Let me just find it. Okay. Can you see attachment B, like a table for fiscal year 2021? Okay, I see a nod. Okay, so this is the monthly monitoring or regular monitoring item for projects with federal and state funding. Just wanted to point your attention to the OBAG funds, which are the STP CMAQ funding. What you're seeing on your screen is the 2021 obligation plan. These projects had a RFA or request for authorization due date of December 1, 2020. I believe 3 of them have already received obligation or E76, but there are a few that are still outstanding, working on issues regarding right-of-way or whatnot. So those are still outstanding. The deadline or the kind of guarantee date for the funding has already passed as well, February 1st. So these agencies, a handful of them are working towards obligating the funds and getting E76 pretty soon, hopefully. And then the next table I wanted to point to is the next page, or page 30, which is the 2022 plan of projects. So this list of projects here need to submit the RFA by December 1, 2021 of this year in order to go through the process to get the E76 in time before that February 1st date to have your funding be guaranteed. So if your agency has projects on this list, please do start, begin your field review work so you could get that federal process started by time around July. I usually go around asking people for whether or not a field review has been completed in order to get back to MTC to place these projects to be on the list for the fiscal year 21-22. So I'll pause here if there are any questions. I don't see any. Okay, and then lastly, I wanted to update you guys on the TIP. So the
I don't see any hands raised.
Oh, thank you, Christina. So yeah, I was saying the 2021 TIP, it's in its process of being adopted. The date is going to be April 16th, 2021. That's when the 2021 TIP will be finally adopted. And then, so because of that, there are no more revisions to the 2019 TIP. So, so just FYI on that one. I also was made aware that the air conformity status at MTC will lapse for a few months between August to maybe in the fall time. So in that period, we will not be able to make any changes to the TIP. So if you have any need to make modification of your projects or amendments, for your projects that are in FMS or the TIP, please do so before May 1st in order to get that change before that lapse happens. If you have questions or about that, please feel free to contact me individually about your projects if you have a concern about that. But just FYI, if you need to make any TIP revisions, please submit that FMS entry before May 1 in order to get that included before you can't make revisions to the TIP. So that's my update. Let me know if there are any questions. Again, feel free to contact me directly if you have anything specific for your project or your agency.
Great, thanks, Stephanie. Is there anyone wishing to speak during public comment on this item?
I see no hands raised.
Okay, and I just want to go back to our committee and confirm that there's no questions. Okay, that's all right. Moving along. The next, and this is just informational, so we don't have to worry about anything. The next item on the agenda is also an informational item. It's on the proposed funding allocation policy, and Hisham Noemi will present this item. Hisham, are you there?
Yeah, hopefully you can hear me now and you can see the slides. Okay, great, thank you. Good afternoon, Madam Chair and committee members. I will be presenting this item, but as part of this item, I thought might be a good time to give you an update on where we are with Measure J, since not everybody here may be familiar with it. So this is for you some basic information. Hopefully you can bear with me for couple minutes to go over this information. Measure J, we are now in year 13 of the measure since it became effective on April 1st, 2009. We still have 12 more years to go, so we're just past half the point, past the half point in the measure before it expires in 2034. And as you know, the Measure J expenditure plan assigned funding to specific projects and to specific programs to be funded. When you add the funding for these projects and programs, it adds up to actually exactly $2 billion in 2004. It's important to note that when you look at the expenditure plan, it really didn't have a line item on financing costs. So I also didn't have a contingency in case we don't collect $2 billion in 2004 dollars. It differentiated between projects and programs. The difference between projects and programs, the programs basically get a fixed percentage of our annual sales tax revenue, like the city's return to source money, or the money we give to the bus operators. These are fixed percentages. Whatever we collect in a year, basically 18% goes to the city, 5% goes to transit operators, and so on. So, and we're only spending money that we've accumulated. We're not using bonds to advance these programs. They wouldn't be eligible anyway for bonds. The projects, on the other hand, we took the authority basically took the strategy of financing the projects to accelerate their delivery. We were basically able to issue bonds against the project portions of our revenues, future revenues, to take advantage of good construction bid climate, low interest rates, as well as infusion of one-time state and federal money, like Proposition 1B and the stimulus funds in 2008 and 9. By following this strategy, we were able to basically build the project sooner than otherwise would have been possible. And that basically benefits the public by having this improvement sooner than otherwise possible. And at this time, all the bonds have been issued And actually 90% of the projects that are programmed in the strategic plan are either constructed or underway. The revenue forecast is the most important factor that impacts how much each project in the strategic plan gets in funding. You probably recall seeing this chart. I've shown it a couple times, at least in the last few months. It shows how our revenue took a hit in 2008. You can see the deep slide in 2008. And also there is a reduction in 2020 because of COVID-19. The Great Recession did result in at least 30% reduction in the amount of funding that we assumed to build the expenditure plan, as you will see in the next slide. But despite that 30% reduction in revenues, we still managed to deliver the projects that were promised to the voters by basically reducing the Measure J funding to correspond to the reduction in revenues, but leveraging the other funds to make up the shortfall. And this was possible at the time because we had not yet spent our Measure J funds. The measure didn't really start until 2009, after the recession. And we were able to effectively use the measure money to as a match to attract other fund sources. We are fortunate that despite COVID-19, the hit to our revenues is much less than what we feared. It was basically about 3.2% reduction. We were fearing it's going to be closer to 14%. So luckily, it's not a bad hit to absorb. And basically the latest numbers, as you can see in the solid line, for the next 3 years show that, you know, we're tracking very well with what we assumed in the 2019 strategic plan, slightly higher, but we still don't know where that solid line gonna be after year 2023, whether it's gonna dip below the 2019 strategic plan estimates or whether it's gonna be tracking it as well, or even higher. We hopefully will have those projections in June of this year. But until we have that projection, we really don't, you know, we're really not sure if we're going to have to make further cuts to funding, to the Measure J funding for the projects. That's why the board, a couple months ago, basically, in May last year, it has been almost a year now, temporarily suspended the Measure J appropriations to the remaining projects in the strategic plan and the TLC Build Buy program. As you can see in this slide, with each strategic plan, our estimate of revenues that will be generated fluctuated. So when the measure was initially passed and when we developed the Measure J expenditure plan, we were anticipating $2 billion in 2004 dollars. With the last strategic plan, because of the Great Recession, because of assumed reduction in revenues in the future, that number is about 1.6 billion. When you look at escalated dollars, we're basically down 30% compared to what Measure J originally assumed when the expenditure plan was developed. And as I mentioned, despite the reduction, we basically managed to deliver most of the projects in the expenditure plan. We followed the four-pronged strategy you see on the slide by getting projects shovel ready to compete for funding when they come our way, by issuing debt basically to get the project shovel ready and to allow us to take them to construction when they're fully funded, and also by using our funding as a match to other fund sources. And if you look at the 2019 strategic plan, there were a total of 89 projects. studies programmed in the strategic plan. 48% are already complete, 12 are under construction, and 22 are in project development phases. And there were only about 6 or 7 projects that really haven't started. And by not started, I mean we have not yet appropriated any Measure J funds to them. And for the projects that were constructed or that were completed or under construction, we basically put about $695 million on these projects, and the rest of the funding for these projects came from other sources, which is about 1.7 billion. So we've been effective in leveraging our funding to attract other fund sources. Oh, my screen stopped moving. Okay, here we go. Again, this just shows you a dashboard of where we are in terms of the capital projects in the measure. 92 of the projects out of the 89 are either completed or underway. And we've already spent about 90% of the money that's programmed in the strategic plan. So for the next 12 years, we're going to be spending the remaining 10%. And these are some of the projects that we completed, and they are in all parts of the counties. And I'll just skip through them quickly. And this one is just finished, the southbound HOV express lane. And this is the largest projects we're working on now, which is in progress and should be done in the next 6 months. In terms of the programs, there are basically 8 programs in Measure J in addition to the TLC and PID bike program. And in general, we've spent about 1/3 of the money in the measure on these, on each of these programs. If you look at the local street maintenance, we've spent about 34%, the same with bus operations and so on. The only exceptions where we haven't really spent much money is the West County ferry operations. And that's because the ferry operations didn't really start until last year, and then now COVID hit. So we only spent 6% of the money set aside for that program. In terms of the TLC and the PID bike program, assuming the projections in the 2019 strategic plan hold, basically over the life of the measure, we're going to end up with $142 million spent on these programs. We've already programmed, the planning department programmed about $60 million of that total 142 so far. And there were programmed 86 projects. 72 of these 86 projects are either completed or underway. And the amount we've spent so far is about 50% of the $60 million. And all these amounts spent are as of the last fiscal year, June 30th, 2020. So let's talk about sub-regional equity. I know this is an important topic. So I thought maybe just spend a minute to talk about it. Sub-regional equity has always been a standing goal of the authority. During the development of the Measure J expenditure plan, each sub-region basically was asked how they want to program their share of the $2 billion in anticipated revenues. And their share was based on an estimate of 2020 population, about the mid-year of the measure. Some sub-regions, they placed more of their share in projects, like in East County, while others put more of their share in programs, like in West County. So the chart on the left shows how the projects funding, Measure J funding, is split between the different sub-regions based on what the sub-regions told us their priorities are. So 49% of the projects, Measure J projects funding, was programmed to East County. while 8% was programmed in West County. The picture basically flips when you look at the programs, where you can see West County has the most amount put in programs, while East County has the least amount put in the programs. And that just reflects the different nature of each subregion. In East County, there was more need to build Highway 4, widen Highway 4, extend BART, and so on. So they needed more money to develop, to put into these capital projects. So when you look at the strategic plan, basically, when you add up all the funding for the different projects, it's gonna reflect the chart on the left. So 49% of the money in the Measure J strategic plan, because the strategic plan only deals with projects, not programs. So 49 is basically programmed to project in East County, 8% in West County, and so on. So in general, we basically try to avoid a situation where we program all the funds that are available to each subregion in one subregion, and nothing in another. We try to balance it every strategic plan, but now we're reaching at a point where 90% of the Measure J funding for project has already been spent. So you will end up with a situation where one subregion basically is done with all their projects, while another may have a little bit more than the others. So at the end, I just want to make sure everybody understands that when the measure ends, each subregion will exactly get their share, nothing more and nothing less. So let's talk about the allocation plan. With that as a background, we really need to prepare for future revenue declines. And right now, because of where we are in the measure, basically all the funding for the capital project is pretty much spent. We don't have the ability to basically just take funding from projects to address revenue reductions. So that's why you saw the board basically suspending appropriations to remaining projects, because you know, the tools that we have are now dwindling down if we hit a major reduction in our revenue. So the board basically in February last month, they approved the ranked list of the remaining Measure J projects in the strategic plan and those programmed in the TLC and the PID bike documents. Basically, we had two ranked lists, one for local projects and another for authority managed projects. We had to rank the projects basically to prepare for potential declines in our revenues. We didn't know in May of last year how bad it's going to be. By doing that, basically, it allowed us to focus our limited Measure J money in a way that basically attracts the most in state and federal money. So we gave priority when we ranked the list. Projects that had the most in other fund sources basically rose to the top. So the top 14 projects on the local list, basically they attract about $54 million in state and federal money. So the board basically in February approved resuming appropriations to those top 14 projects. They only need about $11 million in Measure J. So for these projects, you know, they can come and ask for their money and the board will appropriate money for them. The remaining 18 projects, basically we are still continuing the suspension of appropriations on those. They need $32 million to move forward. But the board said, you know, we're gonna try to find other ways to fund these projects if at the end these projects don't get their Measure J. And this list shows the projects that the board agreed to resume appropriations for. Make sure if you have a project on this list that you come in and ask for your money sooner than later. And that's the $11 million that's needed for these projects. And The next two slides, this one and the one after, basically shows the remaining projects that have not yet received their appropriation, that the board is still suspending appropriations for. So, so with that, the board basically told us we're gonna try to fund these projects from other fund sources. But before I go there, I want to also share that. So this is the continuation of the list, the local list. And this is also the authority managed projects. We also put the projects that the authority manages in priority order based on how much each project has in other fund sources, what is the size of the shortfall, and so on. And we are basically focusing work right now on the top 3 projects on this list, but we're gonna hopefully at some point get all of these projects done. So now we can dive into the allocation policy. Why? I mean, the first question is, why do we need it? Why do we need to have a policy? And well, the policy is necessary to ensure we have a process to update the project lists in the allocation plan. Let's say a project, gets other fund sources, federal or state federal funds. I mean, that should really move them up on the ranked list. Also, we needed to prioritize these projects for future state and federal funding if they don't receive Measure J funds. How are we memorialize that policy, commitment? And also, the policy will set eligible uses for the fund exchange reserve that we are building up right now. So I'll talk about each one of these one by one. So in terms of the allocation plan updates, policy says basically we're going to update it twice a year. And the allocation plan, when we talk about the allocation plan, it's basically the 2 ranked lists, the local list and the authority managed list. So the policy basically says we will update it twice a year at a minimum to reflect changes in project's funding and delivery status, but we'll also update it every time the board makes an appropriations, Measure J appropriations to a project on the ranked list. So we can track how much we appropriated and how much is left to be appropriated. In terms of the second goal of the policy, which is to program future funding, how are we gonna basically give these projects priority for funding from future sources? Well, consistent with what we did with the Quick Strike program, which, by the way, the board approved yesterday to submit the list to MTC. The policy defines the process on how we plan to give priority to fund the remaining projects in the allocation plan in the future. When the authority is asked to submit projects to program, staff will work with the sponsors to determine if their project is eligible and can meet the fund source requirement. If it does, then we will submit it. If it doesn't, then it will not be submitted, of course. But if there is enough money to do all the projects on the ranked list, then we will submit them all. But there will be a situation where that's not the case. The amount you're getting will be limited. In that case, we may end up ranking our projects based on the fund source requirements and then submitting a subset to them. In the unlikely case that we have more money than what we need to do all the projects on the ranked list, then we'll basically look at prior calls for projects to see if there were any projects that we couldn't fund because of lack of funding, and these projects still need money, or we could just issue a call for projects in that situation. Let's talk about the fund exchange reserve. You probably recall, I think it was in December when the board approved a fund exchange agreement between CCTA and San Ramon. basically the agreement allowed us to program STIP funds for the Iron Horse Trail project in San Ramon in return for us keeping the city future return to source money from Measure J for a total of $9.2 million. If we hadn't done that agreement, basically we would have to delay the STIP money because the projects where this money was programmed for wasn't really going anywhere. It had a huge funding shortfall. So rather than delay the STIP funds and lose purchasing power, what we said basically in the agreement is we can loan the city that money, we're gonna program the money, the 9.2 in STIP money to that project. In return, we will keep the city's return to source money and put it in that reserve, the fund exchange reserve. The benefits to the city from this agreement is that they're basically getting an interest-free loan, and they're paying it over 9 years with no interest. If we didn't have that deal, basically they would have to issue bonds to accelerate their future return to source money so their project can become fully funded. So they saved money. In our case, we're getting flexible money that we could use as a match for future fund sources to attract other fund sources. And this slide shows some of the eligible uses of the reserve, which we will build up over the next 9 years. This is not money that we have in the bank now. It'll be built up over 9 years. We will get about $1 million every year. And I want to note that, you can probably read these uses, but I'm going to use this money as a matching funds for the project where we're competing for funding for. If a city that has a project on the rank list and they need our help to develop a grant application to compete for federal or state money, they could ask the authority to get some of that funds just to write the grant application, not as a match. And then, we will use probably this money to help us get some projects ready for future fund sources, like doing a project study report or a PID document. If it wasn't for this exchange agreement, the authority most likely wouldn't have been able to do the letter of no prejudice for the RM3 funds on 684, which was approved by MTC. Because if RM3 goes away, basically Measure J needs to be reimbursed for that expense, and this reserve would be able to reimburse Measure J for that expense if RM3 goes away. Hopefully it will not, and we will not have that need for the reserve to do that. So that's the reserve. I want to make sure everybody is aware of it. That we are building this resource to help us secure other fund sources, and this is important. So since we don't have a new measure, we don't have the ability to provide the match. So we need to be creative on how we can do that while we're working on a new measure until a new measure passes. So with that, I'll be happy to answer any question. Stop sharing.
Thanks so much, Hisham. That was a very comprehensive and informative presentation. A lot of work went into that. I'm just curious, what's the next step with that presentation? Are you going to be sharing it with others?
Yeah, so we're going to take it to APC in April and hopefully to the board the same month. We need to have it in place because the 2022 STIP cycle is coming up. So if the board tells us we don't like it, then we probably have to go and issue call for projects. But if they say, yeah, this is the way we need to do, we need to go, then basically it informs us that we don't really have to do a call for project. We have enough projects on these lists to prioritize for that funding. So that's why the timing is becoming critical. Maybe we could potentially delay it a month, but not much beyond that.
Okay. Are there any comments from the committee or questions?
This is Jerry. Hisham, can you share that presentation with the group? Send the slideshow out?
Oh, absolutely, yes. I'll do that after the meeting.
I have one sort of suggestion on the slideshow. You know, there's all different kinds of equity, and I think it's worth taking a look at some of those slides and maybe adding the term geographic equity, you know, before the use of that word.
Thank you. A great suggestion. Yes, I will do that.
Any other questions or comments?
I was going to say, get a new background. That fourth bore was so 10 years ago.
Yeah, we should. I'll talk to Lindsay about that.
I don't see any hands raised for any additional comments or questions.
You know, I've got one at least. So I'm sorry, Hisham, if I just kind of missed this, but I understand what the fund exchange reserve does, but I wasn't quite sure that I understand what the source is of those funds.
Yes, so that's a very good question. So it's basically exchange agreement we end up doing. And you can do that either by loaning STIP money to an agency and then getting paid back with flexible money. So basically you're removing all the restrictions on the money you're getting back. So that's one way. Another way we've done it where we're basically swapped funding on projects. Where we asked, like we did one with MTC, where we gave them $2 million in Measure J, and they gave us $4 million in STP money, where they needed flexible money, local money, to do certain things, and they couldn't do it with federal money. So that's how we generate money into the reserve. It's basically through these type of agreements where it provides a benefit to the authority. But that's
Well,
a very,
look,
Go ahead,
sorry,
Chris.
Hisham. We do have a hand raised.
Is this a committee member or a member?
Well, the name states iPhone.
I think it's
This is Andy Dillard. Sorry
Oh,
about
okay.
that.
That's
Yeah.
okay.
Go ahead, Andy.
Thanks, Leah. Thanks, Hisham. Again, to echo Leah, I appreciate you putting this together, and it, you know, really it does provide a lot of flexibility and options in these current challenging times. So really appreciate all you and the staff's work on this. Maybe you covered it at the beginning, but when might we get a better picture of what the true Measure J outlook is going to be going forward for next fiscal year? Did you say June?
Yeah, we're pushing our CFO for June. Basically, he was, and his consultant HDR, they were waiting for additional data on our revenues before they can do the projection, but last I heard is June.
Okay, and then assuming or crossing fingers that it'll look better than it does now, I'm assuming you'll go back pretty quickly and potentially amend the rank to list to add another grouping of projects beyond the 14, or how would that work?
That's a good question. So there are few things in play now. Let's say for the Quick Strike program that we submitted the projects for, let's say, you know, we submitted the 6 projects from the rank list to that quick strike program, asking for $14 million. Maybe 1 or 2 or hopefully 3 will be funded. So let's say these projects get their federal money, then that frees up Measure J money to do the rest of the project. So assuming the revenue forecast supports it. Also, the revenue forecast itself, the revenue forecast itself, if it comes in June and Brian tells us we were just fine, doing fine compared to the 2019 strategic plan, we don't need to take a hit, then we could potentially just resume appropriations to the 18 projects on the ranked list, even if they don't get or state money. So that's one scenario. Another scenario, he tells us we're gonna take some kind of a hit, 5% or whatever. Then the action we're doing now by trying to fund some of these projects with federal and state money will allow us to stretch the available Measure J money to do more of the projects on the list. And the worst case scenario, he comes in and says, we cannot give any more appropriations to these projects. Then what we will have to do is just follow this policy and try your projects basically become our priority to fund from future sources we control. Like the STIP, like the LPP, like, OBAC 3. I don't see us going out issuing calls for projects if we have a list of projects that's still in the pipeline and waiting for funding. So that's the worst case scenario is he comes in and says, we're overextended, we cannot make any more appropriations beyond the 14 projects, then we will be working with you to look for funding from other sources to do these projects. Best case scenario, he comes in and says, our revenues are better than projected, then we will just resume appropriations to the projects that need funding. Once all the projects on the allocation plan are funded one way or another, basically that allocation plan goes away. It's only there because we're trying to fund these projects.
Okay, so then there is some chance that these projects could move forward in the next fiscal year, best case scenario.
Yeah, so for our budgeting, assuming their schedule is ready already, for our budgeting purposes, we're assuming that, you're gonna come in and ask for appropriations for these projects in the next fiscal year, that the money, Measure J money will be available. Just for budgeting. If that turns out not to be the case, then at mid-year budget, we can fix that.
Great, thanks.
Sure.
Good question. Any other questions, comments from the committee?
Yeah, Heather.
Member
Heather.
Fallon.
Thanks. I have my hand up. This is off tangent a little bit, but since the measure is, basically spent out or closing down, if you will, is there talk of trying to go back out to the voters? I know we didn't do that well the last go around, but is that still being kicked around or?
Yeah, I'm sure we'll be going out. It's just a matter of when. And then there is the question, do we go out for an extension? Because the measure expires in 2034. And as with Measure C, we went out 5 years before it expired to give us a chance to go again if it doesn't pass. So there is still a question of whether it's going to be an extension or an augmentation or both. So that would be up to the board. I don't think the board and Tim made a decision yet on that. I don't think there will be anything in 2022. I think the earliest will be 2024.
Since it was brought up, I have to say that in West County, our board is very interested in getting some analysis of what happened with the election results. And I think before moving on, everybody kind of needs to understand what happened or didn't happen.
Yeah, me too. I don't think I got that either. So we'll convey that to Tim. He actually needs to do that. Actually, I think part of the problem is the consultants where they did the campaign, they really don't work for us. So it's hard to ask them to do this. But I agree with you. I think we definitely need to find out what happened last time.
Any more committee comments, questions?
I'm not seeing any hands.
All right, and then just want to make sure, are there any members of the public who want to comment on this item? All right, seeing none, we'll thank Hisham. And we're going to now move on to a motion and roll call vote to approve the following items. Item 3, approval of the consent calendar. Do I have a motion to approve the consent calendar?
Are we doing these one at a time, or are we doing a single motion and second for everything?
Well, we're doing everything together, but it happens to be that everything is just the consent calendar.
Oh yeah, that's right. No, minutes.
Well, that's, I think, part of the consent.
We're now including the minutes in the consent calendar to help
right.
with these roll call votes.
I'll just make a motion so I can move this forward since I've dragged it out.
Thank you, Andy.
Second.
Was that Steve?
It was the other Andy, I think.
Oh, it's the other Andy. Okay. So we have.
No, it wasn't
It's Jerry
me.
Fahey. It was Jerry Fahey.
Okay. So we got Andy Smith and Jerry Fahey as our first and second. So Christina, please conduct a roll call vote.
Okay. Chair Greenblatt,
Aye.
Vice Chair Wells,
Yes.
Member Alman, Member Anderson, Member Ballinger,
Aye.
Member Bobadilla, Member Chen,
Aye.
Member Cunningham,
This is Member Stan Cunningham. Aye. Sorry, I missed it.
Oh, that's okay. Thank you. Do you remember what time you arrived to the meeting? I think you were here when we all started, right?
Yeah, about 2 minutes after the hour.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. Member Conradi? Member Diaz?
Aye.
Member Dillard?
Aye.
Member Fahey?
Aye.
Member Kirstevan?
Yes.
Member Mercurio?
Aye.
Member Nelson? Member Ortiz?
Yes.
Member Parikh? Member Reeves? Member Rawani? Member Singh? I have Member Smith
Aye.
and Member Wang. Okay, the motion passes with members present.
Great, thanks. So moving on to other business. I just wanted to say this is my last meeting as chair, and your next meeting you'll have the benefit of having Ricky Wells serve as your chair. But I wanted to thank everybody for your patience And I think I go down in record, I hope not to ever have this repeated, where it's that I'm the only chair who's never held a meeting in person with any of you as on the DCC. So hopefully soon we'll get to see each other. Any other business? I'm gonna think that they're done, and with that, we'll adjourn at 3:20. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks.
All of these things I have to click.